Hi guys, my name is Lulu, pronouns she, her, hers, and I am one of your SIPA Spring Turns.
Hello everyone, my name is Eliza Acob. I go by she, her pronouns, and I am one of the SIPA Spring Turns.
What's up everybody? My name is Mark, pronouns him, his, and I'm one of the SIPA interns.
Magandang araw mga kababayan. I'm Janina and my pronouns are she or hers and I'm one of the SIPA shares.
Hey y'all, I'm Camelia. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm one of the Community and Political Affairs chairs.
Community and Political Affairs is proud to announce episode 2 of our podcast called Kwentuhan Korner. If you're a fan of our Filipino Friday infographic series on social media, this is FKF's sister in a podcast format. Filipino Fridays were created to keep you in the know about socio-political issues in the Philippines and around the world.
Kwentuhan Korner aims to do the same thing by implementing a more interactive way to learn about experiences and issues in the Filipino community. We will be having a specific theme for each episode and different segments discussing a variety of topics within that theme. This week's theme is activism, whether that's ways you practice activism, activists you admire or aspire to embody, or how activism can be improved. The theme is up to your interpretation.
Welcome to CPAN, which stands for the SIPA Network. This is a disclaimer, we are not professional newscasters, but we have really researched these current events to make sure they are accurate.
This is a trigger warning as the following current event segment will discuss topics on death.
This is the first current event. So, in recent news, during a scene of Sesame Street, actor/activist Kal Penn talked to TJ, who is Sesame Street's first Philippine American Muppet, about the word of the day, confidence.
It began because there was a colleague of mine, friend of mine, Rosemary Palacios, who works at Sesame Workshop, and she was the mastermind behind bringing more diversity and inclusion into the Sesame Street neighborhood, the world. And she sort of like had the idea to kind of like bring like a Filipino American like Muppet into the fray. So she kind of reached out to me immediately, and I was like, oh my God, yes. I would love to be a part of this, you know?
Bobby Pontius is a Philippine American animator who created and designed TJ. According to Pontius, his inspiration for TJ came from two of his friend's children.
TJ, how do you show your confidence?
Oh, well, I'm learning Tagalog. It's a language my Filipino family speaks, and I am confident because I can always ask my Lola for help when I don't know a word.
Oh, you both have a lot of confidence and people who believe in you. Our confidence grows when we know we can ask for help.
Moreover, Rosemary Espina Palacios, Sesame Workshop's Director of Talent Outreach, commented, "I'm so proud to help bring some Filipino representation to the neighborhood, and just in time for AAPI Heritage Month, to show the range of our diaspora." His first segment with Kal Penn and Ji-young, a Korean-American Muppet, is all about confidence, something I personally feel can help unravel the model minority stereotype. TJ is a reminder to the children's television industry to show more representation in their shows. We have seen more Philippine X/Philippine American representation in shows such as Nickelodeon's Blue's Clues and Disney's Firebuds. In addition, we as the audience should advocate for more representation of Philippine X/Philippine American identities in children's TV and in the entertainment industry in general. The lesson of confidence on Sesame Street will impact children who can relate to TJ and Ji-young as they grow up.
Moving on to the next current event, as of right now, many activists are being targeted as rebels or supporters of the communist insurgency. This is otherwise known as rag tagging or red baiting. This is something that has been used for many decades.
Being red tagged in the Philippines means the government is accusing you of being a New People's Army fighter or a supporter of the communist insurgency. The red tagging is usually done through social media posts or being called out in government news releases or press conferences.
As said by Carlos Conde, a senior Philippines researcher at Human Rights Watch, has said red tagging is a pernicious practice that targets people who often end up being harassed or even killed. Ever since Rodrigo Duterte became president in 2016, the efforts in red tagging have become more and more dangerous. Red tagging became his government's official policy due to the creation of the National Task Force on Ending Local Communist Armed Conflict. This has led to the assassinations of activists Joy Porquia, Rando Ichanis, Zara Alvarez, and Carlito Badillon, branding them as communist terrorists prior to their deaths. This, of course, can be very damaging for those who are trying to get their message across in the Philippines, whether it's about human rights or even environmental rights.
For 6 years, Rodrigo Duterte, Philippines' controversial ex-president, encouraged public assassinations by police officers and hitmen to eliminate not only drug traffickers and users, but also dissenting voices, especially human rights activists and certain journalists.
Do you think the former president could be behind the killing of your brother?
That's a high possibility. There was an instance when he said that journalists are not exempted from assassination. That, hearing that from a president sends a chilling effect to all of us.
More specifically, these threats and attacks put Indigenous communities at risk. Red tagging is still an issue today, and because of how dangerous red tagging is, this has caused so many deaths and activists painting them as communists or terrorists.
So, moving on to our next topic, U.S. occupation in the Philippines. So first, some background. U.S. occupation in the Philippines goes all the way back to the Spanish-American War in 1898. Spain surrendered its colony of the Philippines to the U.S. in the Treaty of Paris, which actually resulted in another war, the Philippine-American War, which lasted 3 years and was led by Emilio Aguinaldo, who sought independence rather than a change in colonial rulers. This war resulted in the death of 4,200 Americans and over 20,000 Filipino combatants, and as a result, 200,000 Filipino civilians died from the resulting violence, famine, and disease that were a part of the war. And then now, with Marcos Jr. being elected as president of the Philippines, him and Joe Biden are talking about strengthening the U.S.-Philippine alliance.
The United States also remains ironclad in our commitment to the defense of the Philippines.
And one of the main points of this alliance is the EDCA agreement, which would actually allow the U.S. military to occupy areas that they identify as potential areas of conflict. And with the Philippines being located close to China and already having really shaky relations, it is very likely that the U.S. military would occupy many areas along the coast of the Philippines that are close to this country. So now that we've covered most about the background of U.S. occupation in the Philippines, connecting it back to activism, recently the DC4, who were part of a group of activists who were protesting outside the restaurant where Marcos was set to dine with billionaires Enrique Razon Jr., Lance Gokongwei, and 7 appointees. This resulted in the arrest of 4 Filipino-American activists and whose names have not been disclosed.
Dozens of Filipino activists, meanwhile, staged a demonstration in protest of the U.S. visit of President Marcos. Outside the White House, protesters say Marcos is not welcome in the U.S. They also fear Washington's increased military presence in Manila could drag the Philippines into the tensions between the U.S. and China. So protesters also gathered outside the Ritz-Carlton Hotel to put the spotlight on the human rights situation in the Philippines.
In fact, Marcos Jr. and his mother Imelda were held in contempt by a U.S. court in 1995 for contumacious conduct causing direct harm to a class of human rights victims. This continuing contempt offense already amounted to $353 million in 2011, and the only reason that he was actually allowed to visit the U.S. was due to diplomatic immunity given to him for being elected president of the Philippines. After doing all this research, I would honestly take the side of the Filipino activists who are against U.S. occupation in the Philippines. With so many negatives to the U.S. occupying the Philippines and so many Philippine civilians that would get in the way of the U.S. military's actions, I believe that even in other countries that the U.S. occupies, they should follow suit.
Mind your business.
Welcome to Pare Pas Pact, where we deliver a fact fast. Did you know that Filipino activist Jose Rizal studied medicine at the University of Heidelberg in Germany? So hi, I'm Eliza.
I'm Lulu.
It's Mark.
And we are 3PA.
Yay! So basically, if you don't know what 3PA is, it's basically when we choose 3 words that relate to what the theme of today's podcast means to us. And today's theme is activism. Okay, so for my word, I chose memories. I think the main reason why I chose this is because in high school, this is where I kind of got exposed to activism. My school had a strike actually for the teachers, and it lasted, I swear guys, it lasted 3 weeks. And it was like towards the end of school. So like we didn't even have that end. But tie it back to activism, I think that was like kind of the first time where I saw like picket lines and just seeing how, not like desperate, but how hard the teachers really worked. Because they were asking for like a pay raise. And knowing that I'm from the Bay Area, like the cost of living there is super high. And when they're explaining kind of like their stories of how it's hard to kind of like make a living, especially when they have families, or like if they're like injured and they can't really get like the health care that they need, it was very, very sad. But I think it was really nice because it was the first time I saw my community coming together to make a change. And it's something kind of small in a way, right? It got the attention of Bernie Sanders, I think.
Really?
Yeah, like he tweeted it. I remember it was that big.
Burn.
Either Bernie or like Kamala, because she's from Oakland.
Oh.
And I don't know, I think that was like a really, I wouldn't say good experience, because obviously I don't think they kind of got the contract that they wanted in the end. But it was like all they could do for now. But I know that they wanted to fight more. So that was my word.
Oh wow, I really like that because what you were talking about, it was sort of like this consistency of having to, like fight and stuff. And which is the word that I chose, consistency. And by continuing to fight and like push what you want, it creates this it just creates this consistency that begins to be seen and possibly even flourish. And although it might not have flourished in the way that people might have wanted, it by being consistent, you can be seen and you can be heard, just like how everybody like Bernie Sanders or Kamala like saw and heard what was going on.
Wow, that was great, Lulu and Eliza. Thank y'all for sharing. And going back to Eliza's story, I stuck with a common theme for my 3 words, so they all start with C. I like to call them the 3 C's. So the first word that I'll be talking about is change. And going back to Eliza's story, of course, the main point of activism is to fight for a change. Of course, going back to Eliza's example, there was something wrong with the pay that the teachers were receiving. Mm-hmm. So they all came together as a community to fight for a change and a higher pay raise. And sometimes you don't always get the change that you want. Like I know that they said, or that you said, they didn't get as much pay as they wanted to. And at the end of the day, it's still important that they were able to fight for that change. All right, and now passing it back to Eliza for her next word.
Yeah, so for me, I chose voices. I feel like when you think of activism, something that's very prominent is like the voices of the people. So I was kind of a part of this research thing over the course of the year. It was about like community health workers during COVID-19, and they're just talking about how like the systems was kind of like a barrier to their work. For example, they weren't getting like enough funding. There were too many people coming in for like help, but there wasn't enough workers. And I feel like when it comes to activism, and especially when it came to like this community health workers, I kind of saw the theme of like voices, because something that like I remember that stood out during an interview was they said, we're the voices of the community, which is very very memorable. And I feel like that kind of goes for like all activists in a way. A lot of them are like the voices of their own communities. And when I think of activism, especially like the ingredients that come with it, I think voices is one of them.
I really like what you said. Like, they're the voices of their own community, because when there's so many voices that have this same opinion and advocating for something that is meaningful, it creates this transformation. And that's the word that I chose, transformation. And when things flourish, it hopefully transforms for the better. And that's something that all activists want. Activism is like what you said, it's the voices of their own community. And I find that so refreshing to hear, because that's something that is definitely needed. Thank you, Elisa.
Thank y'all for sharing. And I know y'all were talking a lot about community, which is actually my next word. So, community is very important in activism. I think that activism itself brings together a community with similar experiences who want to fight for a change. And community is so important in activism itself, because without a community, without a group of people that actually want to change it or fight for the change, then how can anything ever be done? Because in democracy, it's so important for groups of people to come together and have that same belief. And now, passing it back to Eliza for our final words.
Yeah, so my final word for this segment is actually beginnings. So just going off what Mark was saying about communities, I do believe that communities are the ones that start that fight towards justice or what they're fighting for, right? But I also think there's also that one single person or maybe individuals that start that change. So if you're thinking back to maybe the Philippines, whether it's Jose Rizal, when they're fighting for independence from the Spaniards, or for going back to the 1960s when it's the United Farm Workers, it was Leon Veracruz, and also Cesar Chavez, who started that fight for labor rights. So I kind of think just reflecting on those people, we could also be those leaders in our own communities. I know there's something that we are probably passionate about or want to fight towards. I know AAPI hate was a big one. I know Mark mentioned that in an earlier segment. So I guess leaving off with this final word, for the viewers out there, really just think about what you're passionate about and think about how you can make that change in your own communities.
Exactly, Elisa. I agree 100% with what you have to say. You spoke about being passionate, and that's the word that I chose next for my last one. Mm-hmm. Passion. Passion is what drives this consistency and what begins the transformation in activism. That's something that we all need. So when we reflect on past activists, they all have this passion that derived from somewhere. And being able to look back on these past activists, that can spark our passion. And that's something that we all need now.
That was so real, Lulu. All right, and now moving on to my last C, my last word. It's commitment, and that really ties into that passion, because obviously these changes, they don't happen overnight. You need to be passionate. You need to be consistent. Changes, they don't happen just like that, like a snap. They happen over a long course of time, and the bigger the change that you want, even longer it will take. And some of these changes, they need to be made. So just being really committed, and commitment itself is just so important to activism. And
that
has
been
Threepa.
Welcome to Pare Pas Pact, where we deliver a fact fast. Did you know that due to the harassment and attacks against Indigenous peoples in the Philippines, the country is known as one of Asia's most dangerous countries for environmental activists and land defenders?
So this is our guest segment where we invite two special Kaba members, and this will be recurring for Kwentuhan Korner. Our topic for this episode is activism, so we will be talking about that. We'll be talking about their experiences or their knowledge about activism topics. And yeah, who's that Kababayan?
Hi everyone, my name is Faith. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a third-year transfer and mathematics major.
Hi everyone, my name is Basilio. I use he, they pronouns. I'm a first year environmental science and policy major.
All right, thank you so much, y'all, for being here today. Our first question is, what are your experiences with activism?
Yeah, so I guess you could say that my experiences with activism started when I was pretty young. Both my mom and my dad were pretty politically educated, I would say, and they were involved in a lot of the local campaigns. My mom, she worked in a lot of environmental justice nonprofits when I was younger, and so I remember attending marches that were kind of like against like the use of fossil fuels, particularly against a refinery in Richmond. Richmond was a primarily Black and brown community, and so we did a lot of marches there in protest of the Chevron refinery that existed there.
Nice. In terms of my experiences with activism, it only started, I would say, very recently since I transferred to UCI. I remember going to the JFAV march with Kababayan early on in fall quarter, and just being more, I would say, politically active and just aware in GABA spaces. And so in my particular community back at home, it's like, I guess you could say like we're very politically like ambivalent or neutral. And so had there have been like marches or just active political organizations in my community back at home, I feel like I would have been more just, I would say, driven to join, but just because of that type of environment, I wasn't very much like involved, I would say, politically.
Yeah, there's really different experiences from what you both said. And one key takeaway for me is it's really the environment. I mean, Bossy, you had like, growing up, you had this upbringing about being politically involved in things environment-wise and even like Filipino issues. And then also I'm glad that Kababayan was able to provide that environment for you, Faith, because sometimes it's hard to find it. Like in your hometown, if it's lacking, it's kind of hard to look for that by yourself.
Right.
So, our second question is, why should we care about activism? Why is it important?
Activism, I would say, is just, it's involved into, or just there are different, I guess, political events or just topics you can talk about, and it's very much intertwined into everything we talk about. So like what Basi said about fossil fuels, and now I'm thinking socially in terms of just like discrimination and race and stuff like that. Those topics are intertwined into just everything about everyday life, basically. And so I think it would be foolish of us just to sit back and let some things occur. And I would say just the level in which you participate in activism depends on the person, for sure. Like for me, for instance, I would say I'm active, or I display my activism in other ways besides, like, let's say, protesting or consistently going to marches. Like I would say through education, I do love the concept of just being able to educate people either formally or informally, like let's say through conversation. That's my just pathway, or just my, I guess, due to my experience of just displaying my activism. It's very much like I'm still I would say fighting for a cause, but not taking so much as like a completely active role in it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For me, I think activism represents like the most crucial part of our democracy. Activism is the way that a lot of things happen. It's how we convey a lot of change, particularly for people who are underrepresented in parts in like government. or who may not have the influence and money to like actually make things happen. It's, for me, activism is like the most direct form of democracy. When we're advocating for things, it's really the people who are like getting the politicians to do these certain things. It's the people who are like advocating for these certain things within their own community to make it better. So for me, activism, whether that be through education, like Faith was talking about, or through like direct action, through protesting and like marching through the streets, activism is really the way the people use their voice when they aren't given one at like in places of power and things like that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, like, there are so many different ways, like, different forms of activism we can take up. Like, you talked about education, you talked about, like, voting and, like, mobilizing people into, like, actual protest or direct action. I guess my question is, like, another way is, like, social media. I know that's very big right now.
So true, yeah.
So I had, like, a follow-up question. Do you think, like, our generation, especially with, like, social media, increase in technology, do you think we're, like, more involved in activism because of that compared to, like, past generations?
I think that it's very easy to say that we're more involved because it's easy to claim that you're a part of an action if all you're doing is posting a video or reposting someone else's video. And, you know, that's really interesting because it brings up the like performative activism where people claim to be supporting a cause where really they're not really doing anything to support. I think real activism is out when happens when you're out in the community, when you're working hard with like other people and you're creating those bonds and you're doing those educational workshops, when you're marching in the streets to bring awareness or to protest something. So in those kind of regards, I think social media has like made us very aware about certain issues, and to an extent we're educated about these issues. But overall, I wouldn't say that social media has. It's complicated.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah, and just in terms of what Basi said about just more awareness, and I do agree with that, where it's like we are a lot more aware of just various social issues going on in the nation, but then also the world, just because of how interconnected social media is. I would also say, though, we are very susceptible to misinformation and disinformation, and so it's kind of like a toss-up, right? So it's like we're seeing all of these different movements and events going on around the world, but at the same time, it's still the question of what is quote unquote right perspective, or what is the true story, or what is actually happening, what is potentially fabricated by the media, what is seeing like the perspectives of the individuals in that particular event or not, and it's still that question of what is accurate and what is not.
For me, with this question, I just wanted to bring up something because with awareness, right? And I think it is also a privilege to have time to deal with these things, because one thing that I speak about to my family or my parents is they had no time to talk about these things because it was constantly survival mode. As opposed to us, we have the time to see it on social media and to act on it. But which is something that has changed and something they see as good. But it's just something I thought of too, because some people don't have the luxury of time, or even seeing it on social media too, because not a lot of people, like, some people don't have access to social media.
Right.
But this is one thing that I do love and want to highlight also is getting connected with worldwide events. I mean, we've seen a lot of uprisings that was because of media, because they were seeing it in another country and they're inspired from that. But yeah. All right. So, one thing about this segment is we do just want to get to know our general members as well. So, in this question, we want to know what are the key things that you are passionate about. So, it could be anything, any topic that you are involved in or like have researched. Yeah.
I am I would say, very passionate about intersectionality and what that involves. So, like LGBTQ rights, black rights, Asian rights. It's just because of just my experiences in those communities. I feel like just having knowledge about and knowing where everything comes from and how it's all interconnected, I feel like that is something that is very crucial. I would say no particular, I don't know if I would consider myself a very passionate person, but in that realm of where things overlap and where people can come together in that sense, I would say I have a great passion for.
Yeah, I would agree with Faith. I think for me, when I really started to examine a lot of these environmental issues, I realized that there are also racial issues, right? Going back to the Richmond refinery, Richmond is primarily black and brown. And so a lot of these environmental issues disproportionately affect black, indigenous people of color around the world. And so for me, in high school, and particularly during the uprisings in 2020, for Black Lives Matter, that was really my exposure to more intersectionality between race, LGBTQ plus rights, the queer community, and also environmental rights. And even in the Philippines, there's intersectionality between imperialism and corruption in the government, and environmental justice. A lot of these companies and corporations that are causing this damage to the environment are from international corporations that are exploiting the Philippines for its natural resources. So for me, once I started to really dig deeper, it's the root causes of a lot of the problems that we see in our community. A lot of them are all interconnected with each other and come from very similar sources, if not the same source.
Yeah, like what Basi said, in terms of the environment, you can't really talk about the environment without including the voices of indigenous and the native people of that particular land or environment. When talking about LGBTQ rights, you can't not include black and brown voices and their experiences. When you're talking about women's rights, we cannot discredit trans women's experiences as well. And so it's just very much, you have to include, in terms of what we're trying to fight for, just different people's perspectives, because at the same time it can get very if it's not done right, I would say certain movements can get very, I guess, one-sided because they're only framed by one particular perspective, and we cannot discredit the voices of the marginalized communities.
Yeah, I really liked the incorporation of just intersectionality, just because sometimes it feels like people are alone in the fight, but when you think about it, it's really connected, because it's not supposed to be this is our fight, this alone is our fight, because if you look at the root causes, right, they're all affected in a way. And even I also liked how you talked about including everyone, because in feminism, right, that's the first thing I thought of. In feminism, who were the ones talking, right? Before, brown and black women weren't really included in the conversation. This is where the white feminism came in. And the more people realized that, the more women from the global south were included in the conversation. So it's really cool how we progress to include more people and really reflect and have constructive criticism of the movements that who are they excluding. Sorry.
Well, yeah, you could say that well, you could argue also that it's a lot of these people who were often lacking in intersectionality who started these movements in the first place. If you think about Stonewall, who was the first person to start to protest, right? And so when you really think about it, it's not so much that it's like these other voices who are starting these movements, but rather taking them over and co-opting them for their own uses, particularly in things like feminism.
Oh yeah, I'd like to highlight that too, because that is factual. I'd like to rephrase it then. It's more of they're the louder ones in terms of this. And you said like there's a lot of things in history that Indigenous people have started. Talks about environmentalism, even LGBTQ topics, right? But people who colonized them were the ones who brought these new beliefs and changed the narrative, and now they're the ones who are being seen as the forefront. So thank you for like highlighting that, Bossy.
I would also say like in terms of maybe not to speak on like the older generation, but when maybe they think of like the feminism movement or just LGBTQ rights, possibly, and this has happened in my mind as well, where it's like, who are the people they think of in terms of LGBTQ people? White gay men, potentially white lesbian women. That's who they think of. In terms of like the feminism movement, it's very much, white women in power, or just white women, taking the lead in terms of that. And so it can be misconstrued as, oh, so they were the ones who started the movement, when in actuality it was Black and brown voices who spoke up first and were eventually, I would say, just brushed off or pushed to the side and not even included in many scenarios.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I really love this conversation about intersectionality. Like, in one of my classes, I'm supposed to write a research paper, and I chose, like, I'm supposed to pick, like, a movement, a protest, or, like, a revolutionary, and I chose Stonewall, and I'm trying to get into that because I know there's a lot of, like, deep history there of, like, Black and brown folks leading that movement. But then you look at the movement today, how much it's changed for good and for bad. And then just like another thing that came to my head is like, I know like sometimes with the environmental movement, we see a lot of like white women preaching like recycle, like you see them as like the forefront of like, oh, we're doing eco-sustainable products, stuff like that. But then if you look at like Asian communities, like my mom like recycles like crazy, and it's not like we're not profiting off of it, like we just do it because we know we should do it. Versus like I feel like sometimes I see some businesses who use it as like a way to make money,
a marketing tool.
So I just think that's interesting as well, like when you look at it, when you like think about intersectionality.
Yeah, I'm also writing a paper. It's about traditional ecological knowledge. I'm writing about how traditional ecological knowledge can help find climate solutions. And what you'll find, and like what I found in a lot of my research, is that Indigenous voices, they often have like these very sustainable ways of living and also are very interconnected with the land. And so when you're thinking about like finding climate solutions, you often think, oh, you're at the forefront of like this Western science, when in actuality like Indigenous knowledge and these systems are like years ahead of them, or like very evolved past the current systems that we have right now. I just wanted to highlight that as well.
Yeah, no, I was gonna add on to that, like I was gonna add that topic too, the Indigenous peoples, because they are the ones who like in history have been doing practices that has conserved the earth and their resources, and until now, and like, it's just sad to see that they're fighting for these things, but they're shut down, like especially in the Philippines. They get targeted for trying to voice out that these ancestral lands need to be respected. That's also like one topic that's really like we really need to listen to them, because they have been saying these for years, but they get violence instead, which really doesn't make sense. And one example of that sustainable practice is the Banawe rice terraces in the Philippines. That has been going on for a long time, and why is it sustainable, right? Because they've been practicing sustainable practices.
My example was more about whaling, like the issue of whaling. I know like a lot of indigenous groups will get like pushback on that because like Western societies are like, oh, like, you know, why like whales are endangered or anything like that. It's because of like indigenous communities like overfishing or like over hunting the whales. But if you like look deep down into like their practice, like they see the whale or they see certain animals as like sacred and as like being in unity with nature, not necessarily like one is stronger than the other or something like that. And also like they literally use the entire part of the whale and like any other animals that they hunt. But then if you look at like why whale or like why certain whales are endangered, it's because of like the mass like consumption by like white people and like by like the US and like countries who take over that and turn it into like a method of like making profit. So it's very ironic that now like indigenous people are like left out of that conversation and are blamed for it when they were like the OG, you know.
Yeah, if you look at a lot of their practices, you'll find that a lot of them practice like sustainability and practice and focus on not overfishing, not taking more than what they need. So yeah.
All right, yeah. And I guess with that, we just had another question. All right, so with that in mind, another question we had was, what activism efforts have you heard in the Philippines which you want to take part in the most?
I regret saying that I have not heard a lot just because of where I just, I guess, don't actively look into just, I don't know, activism efforts in the Philippines, but I would like to know more actually in terms of that.
For me, I guess you could start with the environmental issues. When I was younger, like Chevron taking over land for oil was a pretty big thing that I learned about or that my mom taught me about. But now I think it would definitely be Bongbong Marcos and his regime. I think him being elected to president sets a very dangerous precedent for the Philippines, where the son of a dictator, whose family still retains billions of money that they stole from the Filipino people, can rise to power again and use their kind of money and influence to gain power. And so, you know, protesting against Bongbong Marcos and also finding justice for the victims of the EJKs, the extrajudicial killings, I think I'm definitely most interested in. It's very difficult, you know, being 7,000 miles away and living so far apart from the issues, but I believe that they're very interconnected with the issues here. Like the Duterte administration, they had received money and weapons from the Biden regime while they were committing like killings within the streets. So, you know, I would say that there are a lot of ways that these issues in the Philippines are still connected back to America and the US.
Definitely, I would see like how these topics increase your curiosity. Also, like just being also in the diaspora, because I'm imagining myself like in your place, right? It's so hard to imagine like a dictator's son, a dictator who committed so many things, would be in place again. And the politics in the Philippines is, I don't know, it's such a joke. It's such like it's so hard to understand because we have had so many politicians who were already arrested in the past for graft and corruption, came back and still won. They're still in these positions. That's like Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. She was arrested for corruption. She was Duterte's Speaker of the House. And then another one is another president, Estrada, who was also arrested and then came back for a government position. And it's hard to, like, I'd imagine, like, it's so hard to understand, because one thing about the Philippines is people call the voters dumb. But is it really being dumb? You know, like, you can't call the... There's so much more going on. Because if you promise Filipinos, oh, we're gonna change, oh, we're gonna be richer, we're gonna make you rich, they're gonna feed into that. Like, they're gonna be tempted to vote because they want change. But then it's all the same in the end. So yeah, that's why I'm like, I would be curious too. So you definitely brought a lot of knowledge to our audience, right? For the past things that you have talked about, we definitely knew more about new topics maybe for some people, and also just about you and what you're passionate about. But what is one thing that you all want the audience member to know about activism? So this could be about anything.
For me, I would say activism takes many forms, and if you want to get involved in something, do it in your own way, I would say. Either by protesting, marching, educating. Just find your own unique way in order to take part in different communities. But then also just consider, as I said before, and as I mentioned before, just the intersectionality of different topics and of different perspectives. So definitely, and always consider different perspectives when you're taking part in events and activism stances, for sure.
Yeah, for me, I would definitely say to always question why you're doing something, not in a way to undermine what you want to do, but rather to make sure that you really remember what you're advocating for, what you're protesting for, because that's how you really ensure that, you know, the movements that you take part of really stay on track for the ultimate goal of whatever you're trying to achieve. And if that means like remembering intersectionality and remember who's like the forerunners of like the of whatever you're advocating for, like the environmental justice movement, whether that be like remembering like indigenous activists, when you're fighting for racial justice, like who was really pioneering these protests. Yeah, so, you know, always remembering where you came from. That was corny. But also like why you're protesting for a certain thing, or yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, y'all. I really love that. Love all of your insight. Yeah, I just want to say thank you for being our guest today. Hopefully everyone listening, you learned something new, and if you didn't, you know, maybe you can do something moving forward.
Mm-hmm. And same thing, you know, I appreciate both of you, like, genuinely, for taking the time out of your day, for having this casual conversation of just you sharing like your knowledge and your experiences about activism, and being honest too. Like, you know, there are things that we don't know, and that's important. We should acknowledge that there are things that we don't know, so that you know what you don't know, and you can continue to learn. So as I always say to everyone in the audience, you know, keep learning, because that's really vital to your growth and development as a person.
Bar Pass Fact, where we deliver a fact fast. The FBI has documented a 77% increase from 2019 to 2020 in hate crimes against Asian people living in the U.S. And during that period, from March 2020 to June 2021, more than 9,000 anti-Asian hate incidents were self-reported to the advocacy group Stop AAPI Hate. Yet, such crime statistics are likely vastly underreported.
So before we conclude this second episode of Kwentuhan Korner, we have this segment called Aksyon Ngayon, which means action now. This is just our call to action because we would like to end our conversations with what to do next, or what you can contribute to the conversation or to whatever action that is happening. So we just have a few reflection prompts for you all. First is, especially after hearing our guests, our interns, and what Camille and I talked about, reflect on how activism has impacted you and your life, how it's present in your daily, your day-to-day life. And then second, reflect what forms of activism do you get involved in, do you want to get involved in more, because as our guests have mentioned, there are many ways to get involved, and it's activism is not linear for everyone. There are different forms that you could participate in. Lastly, and I'd say this is one of the most important too, is be intentional and acknowledge that there are many perspectives behind activism. It was highlighted earlier to know where these activist sentiments are coming from, because you have to understand there might be voices that are excluded, and again, just be intentional, know why you're doing that, so you could go back to what your purpose is and know that you've been satisfying your needs or whatever people need.
Yeah, and along with these reflections, we also have resources for you. So these are both on-campus and virtual ones. So there are many student-led orgs here on campus that involve in activism. We have MECHA, which is Movimiento Estudiantil Chicanx de Aslan. And then we have Students for Justice in Palestine. And we also have Anakbayan UCI, which is more focused on the Filipino national democracy movement. So those are all orgs you can get involved in if you want to, deepen your activism, especially with the different intersectional issues that they focus on. We also would like to pub out our own Filipino Fridays. This is a version through the podcast, but we also have infographics that we post. We talk about revolutionaries and activists in the Philippines and here, and just many different issues that you can get educated on. We'd also really like to pub out an amazing resource, which is the Cross-Cultural Center. It is home for a lot of us. It's a space made by students for students, and it was built, by people of color, students of color who really wanted a space for us to just discuss issues. And they have many events like the Deconstruction Zone. They have real talks. These are very enlightening opportunities for you to learn about several issues and get more active in your community. So hopefully you can take advantage of all of those. All right, so you made it to the end of our second episode, all about activism. I hope you were able to reflect, learn something new, and hopefully you can, participate in some actions moving forward. We just wanted to pub out our feedback form. We love feedback. We'd like to hear all your questions, concerns, what we did right, what we did wrong. So please send it to tinyurl.com/SEPA feedback form, and we'll be looking out for that.
And I would just like to thank you, everyone who has been part of this process on behalf of Camellia. Thank you to Natasha for helping us with the podcast, the logistics of it. Thank you to our saplings, Lulu, Mark, and Liza, Melusa, helping us with these segments. Thank you for helping us edit this whole podcast. Thank you to our guests, Basilio and Faith, for dedicating this time and sharing their knowledge and experiences. And thank you to my co as well for, doing this with me. This is our last one, and this is something we envisioned and we finally released too. And so, I'm proud of us for this and, another wrap up for one of our programs. And thank you all for listening to both or one of the podcasts that we have released, podcast episodes. like we really appreciate the feedback, or like just listening and just learning with us. But yeah, salamat, thank you.
If you made it to the end, comment a dinosaur emoji.
Signing off for the last time, Basilio.
Ingat, take care everyone.
I'll see you again. Kita kits, utro.
Maraming salamat. Thank you very much.
I'll see you guys later. Thank you for listening.
And have a nice day.
And that was Kwentuhan Korner.